Hi everyone, it's Nicole. Welcome back to my channel and another paper crafting video tutorial. Today we're going to be creating this awesome faux watercolor background using Papertrey ink products from, I believe this is the March release. Now the stamps and the frames I'm using here, as well as the die cut Hello Greeting, come from the Pro Stampers March box, and you can see that I kind of stamped and die cut a bunch of things. I'm also going to stamp them here on camera, just kind of testing to see if I thought it would work. But the real feature of this whole thing, in addition to these stencils which come in that Pro Stampers March collection, we're going to apply one of these with grit paste to the background of our card panel, but then we're going to take these watercolor wonderful stencils, and we are going to stencil over the top of the dry paste to give a faux watercolor effect background. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to share all of the ins and outs of how I created these beautiful cards. We are going to, of course, start with our 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch panel of smooth white cardstock. I am using the stamp wheel from Altenew to hold my stencil and my cardstock in place while I'm working. Instead of centering the first stencil from that Pro Stampers March collection, I am placing it in the upper left corner, and I have some Tim Holtz opaque white grit paste and a palette knife, and I'm just going to kind of place my grit paste through the stencil randomly. I'm not going to use a stencil pal here, and instead I will be using my palette knife. It doesn't have to be perfect. And in fact, I kind of prefer it not being perfect. We are going to go ahead and do this upper left corner, and then I'm going to move the stencil down and do even more stenciling. I don't want to overlap and mess that up, but I'm going to do a little stenciling down here as well. So just kind of a different way to grunge it up here for the background of our card. Now you will want to let this set aside and completely air dry. It will not take very long. And while it's air drying, I like to go clean my stencil, my tools, all of that good stuff. You want to make sure it's cleaned immediately. Once completely dry, we are going in with the Watercolor Wonderful, it's such a tongue twister, stencil set. Starting with the larger of the two watercolor stencils, I am going to apply Salvaged Patina Distress Oxide ink right here in the center of the panel, over the cardstock, over my grit paste. And the grit paste is obviously going to pick that color up a little bit more, but what I love is that it's going to kind of look like you went ahead and stenciled the background and then you watercolored right over the top. That's exactly the look we're going for. So I'm just gonna make sure I have a nice little bit of inking, and then I'm going to remove the stencil and I'm gonna soften the edges just a bit by going in with my ink blending tool. I'm not going to add any more ink to it, and just kind of soften out those edges. Not a lot. I'm not pressing very hard at all. Just kind of pulling that color out just a little bit more outside that stenciled line. So you'll notice I went over it once and then twice and just kind of kept going over it. Grabbing the second of the Watercolor Wonderful stencils, I am now going to place that over the top of what we just did. This time, we are going to go in with a little Peacock Feathers ink for a tone on tone. So this is going to give it the look that we went in and put another layer of darker watercolor right on top. That's definitely what I'm looking for. So it kind of pools out, if you will, much like watercolor would. And I just went around the edges there. Love it. Look how awesome this looks. This stencil set alone is one of my very favorite things from PTI. I love, love, love it. Finally, we have the spatter. This I'm going to use Rustic Wilderness instead of the blue. So I'm kind of imagining that I took a green watercolor and spattered that all over the surface. And the reason being is we are going to have some greens in our finished card, and I kind of wanted it to look like I went in and pulled some of that green color out and into the rest, or kind of into the background, to tie it all together. And I love it. And just like that, we have a faux watercolor background. Super easy peasy. You could do this with any colors that you like. You'll notice I just even went back with my ink blending tool, and I'm going to pull that color out a little bit further out into the white areas just to soften it up a bit. I love these stencils. Next, I do have this frame shape from the Pro Stampers March collection. It's got the 2 frames and several greetings. I am going to be using this one here, kind of the, I don't know, is it a hexagon shape? And then the word hello. Now, I die cut my frames from some Simon Says Stamp wood grain cardstock. And because of that, when I take this small ink cube, this is some Gathered Twigs Distress ink from Tim Holtz, and I lightly do the direct to paper technique, it is going to draw out the wood grain texture of the design, and it really makes it prominent, almost like these are some real wood grain frames. So with the die cutting and then that little bit of inking in the wood grain paper, this is one of my favorite effects and a super quick and easy way to add texture. You'll even see that I die cut a partial frame because it's going to hang off the edge, and I was using up all of the cardstock that I had left in that little piece. Any little bits and pieces that I have of that wood grain, I hold on to, and I am making 2 cards today, so that worked out perfectly. Next, I'm gluing the frames to my background in a pattern, if you will. So I laid them out to kind of see and make sure that I like how that's going to look. I think that's going to be perfect, but we need some florals. And again, this particular floral set is from the Pro Stampers March 2024 collection, but any kind of florals are going to work. Papertrey ink has so many fantastic floral sets. You may already own some or have some from another company that you would like to try. So definitely keep that in mind. You can always kind of replicate the design with things that you maybe already own or have on hand. These are layering stamps, and we are going to start with Butter Simon Says Stamp, Positively Saturated ink, and some honey ink. I love these yellows. I can't stress enough how amazing these yellow inks are. I love that I love a yellow that's like the color buttery and honey. So it's definitely not that bright-ish color, and they're a little more muted, which I love. So we are going to stamp multiples of these for our couple of cards. I already stamped one off camera, as I mentioned, so I don't actually need to stamp it again. If I was stamping these all at one time, I would have stamped, I would have flipped my cardstock, pardon me, and stamped it again. So each card is going to feature 3 florals. Now that is how many florals come in the stamp set. If I wanted a fuller bouquet, I could definitely stamp some of these again. So next, I'm going to take the layering stamp set. Now that I've gathered all of the parts and components for my card, it is time to start putting it together. Before I glue anything down, I do want to take all of my stems, all of my flowers, and I want to build the flowers first, place them kind of in the frame where I think they're going to go, and then I will attach the frames to my card. And I'm doing it in that order today because I do want to pop up my frames with some foam adhesive, and I need to be thoughtful with where I actually place that foam adhesive, because part of the stems and the flowers will stick either out or below the frame. The yellow against the kind of aqua or teal of the salvage patina and peacock feathers is going to look amazing. And doesn't it look like a watercolor background? I can't get over how beautiful and natural it looks, and it's all created with stencils. So I've assembled my flowers on the stems with all of the little parts and pieces. And again, I just like to do that first so that I have a very good idea how tall they are going to be, and then I can overlap them a little bit. And that is kind of the beauty of this. I want it to look like maybe some decorative frames on the wall where we've tied them up with twine. If you've ever heard me talk about scene building or a scene card and the story I tell myself as I am assembling a card, it is not much different than a card like this. This is almost imagining a group of florals tucked into a decorative frame on the wall. Now, before I attach these to my card, I'm going to slightly overlap them just like I did, glue them together where they overlap, and I've got some twine here. This is some twine from May Arts. It's in a spool I've had for years and years, but any kind of thin twine or ribbon will work here. Even a nice thin, like 1/8 inch silk ribbon would be beautiful. I'm going to wrap it around my florals a few times. And after that, I'm going to snip it and tie it into a little bow, making like a little, almost like a dried flower bouquet that you've tucked into a frame. That's kind of my imagining for the story behind this card. Then we're going to kind of hold the knot, and then I like to pull until I have the loops fairly even. I'm going to leave the ends long for just a minute. And once I am happy with how this is looking, we can start to assemble. I've got some thin foam adhesive strips here from Simon Says Stamp. And I'm going to leave the bottom open for just a second while I move around the top. And I am simply snipping my foam to fit. Just like so. These would make great shaker frames too. Then, because I've left the bottom open, we're going to look at it. That looks good. Once I kind of have it, the florals positioned where I want them to go, I'm going to add a little glue, and then that's to the front of the frame. Flip it over, and now we will place our foam on the back, finishing off the frame. Excuse me. You just have to be rather thoughtful in the order of how things are attached if you're going to have some things sticking outside of your frame. And I love that because it gives it a little bit more of a soft look. I'm pulling the backing paper off, and we want to position this frame first. This is the critical frame that matters the most. Once we have that, then we can take our other two frames. We're going to do a fun little trio, and we are going to do the same thing, only these frames don't actually have anything in them. Only the one really does. The others are just more used as decorative purposes to round out the card design. And of course, this is one of those partial frames from whatever wood grain cardstock I had left. And we're just going to kind of lift up that stem, which it will slightly overlap. And you'll notice I'm lining it up so it perfectly aligns with that small straight edge of the first frame. And then the same thing for the third frame. This one also will hang off of the card at the top. So I didn't put adhesive all over this one either. Now, anything left over, if you're creating multiple cards, you could potentially just use two frames, and whichever one you cut off, you could take the second one and place it down at the bottom. And that looks amazing. Now that I have my frame in place, I am going to put a foam adhesive square back behind my florals just to help give them a little stability, avoiding where I've already popped other elements up with foam, and secure that. Then I'll flip the panel over, and I am going to go ahead and snip off anything hanging off the edge. So that's going to be our frames. We're also going to snip the ends of our twine. Now it is time for our greetings. For our greetings today, we are going to take, or actually it's time for our leaves. Leaves are going to help fill in the rest of our bouquet beautifully. I almost forgot. And we have lots of great little greenery here. So you'll notice I'm just tucking them in, gluing them down in place. Look how pretty. This really does kind of fill in the whole thing perfectly. And as always, I like to play around with it and get it exactly the way I want it to look. So let's add a little more glue to these. Perfect. And one final one, let's tuck it up here a little bit. Okay, our sentiments today. So in the Pro Stampers March collection, you do get a couple of large die cut greetings, perfect for many occasions. I have die cut the Hello 3 times from 110-pound weight Neenah smooth white cardstock and once from gold matte cardstock. We're simply going to glue them one on top of another to give it more stability. Now this will slightly overlap not only the popped up elements on the card, but part of the card that is the background. Because of that, we are going to have to try to finagle it to place some foam under the areas that don't overlap what is already popped up. So let's start by giving our Hello stability. And I do find with the mirrored gold and silver and rose gold cardstocks, all of those kinds, they tend to be a little flimsier, and I like for them to be a little bit more structured and a little thicker and more prominent. That is the sentiment of our card, and so I do like to usually put a couple of layers behind them for the most part. Not always, but I'd say 9 times out of 10 I do. So once we have that and we kind of have it all layered together, look at that. Isn't that beautiful? We can kind of look at it, lay it on our card, and see where we maybe need to add some foam, especially down that long leg of the letter H. Now I think the foam strips are going to be thin enough to fit back behind it, so that's what I'm going to do, and I think that should be enough to make our sentiment lay nicely on our card design. I'm going to put some liquid adhesive behind the rest of the letters. We're going to tuck it kind of up and under the bow and layer it right over the frames and part of our bouquet. And then I'll put something heavy. I usually like to use my acrylic blocks to help hold that down, hold it flat while my liquid glue dries. Now for the rest of our sentiment, one of my other favorite stamp sets from the March release was the Just Notes collection. So from this collection, it has all of these great pencils and goodies in it, and I am going to take a banner and a small phrase, and we're going to stamp that small phrase and then die cut it with the little banner die. So again, these are from the Just Notes stamp set with the pencils. I did a colored pencil card. I will link to that here at the end of this video. And I'm going to use the scrap of white cardstock where I have, I guess I did die cut a pencil from here, but also my leaves and flowers. Using salvage patina or peacock feathers, I think I used one on one card and the other on the other card. I am stamping the phrase for my card, "You're so amazing," and then I'm die cutting it with the coordinating banner die. Often I like to put with a large script or a large die cut greeting a smaller phrase sentiment strip, and in this case a little sentiment strip banner. We're going to put foam adhesive on the back of that. We're going to pop it up on our card. I did move it around a little bit. It was a little too perfect. So let's trim up a little of that foam. And I'm going to have it off-centered and then hanging over the frame just a tad. I like that. I think that looks a little bit prettier. More centered with the card background than with the word hello. And to me, that just balances beautifully. Now it's time to add some finishing embellishments. I've got these pretty pink Posh gems or pearls, and I am going to add dabs of glue all over the background. I did contemplate using some yellow, but ultimately I opted for a color very similar to the salvaged patina and peacock feathers of the background. I think it's a little softer this way, and it doesn't draw quite so much attention, and instead just ties it all together beautifully. I am using the embellishment wand from Simon Says Stamp to easily pick up my embellishments and pop them in place. And then I will place this on a white top fold card base, and our cards are all finished. Thank you so much for joining me today for this faux watercolor background card featuring Papertrey ink, March 2024 stamps, dies, and stencils. The supplies I used are listed and linked below the video here on YouTube. Thank you so much for joining me today for another paper crafting tutorial. I love being able to share with this incredible community of crafters. I want to give a huge shout out and special thank you to my amazing Patreon members. If you're interested in joining Patreon, please click the link in the description underneath the video here on YouTube. Patreon is a private community where you can support more of what I do. There is exclusive content, information, and behind-the-scenes content. Top-tier members will receive a handmade birthday card during your birthday month, access to D-Stash, and monthly exclusive lives, plus so much more. We would love to have you join our growing community. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel, click the like button, and don't forget to hit the notification bell to always be notified when I have a new paper crafting video or I go live. Thank you so much for joining, and we'll see you next time.